Yeah, this does remind me of the wonderful gift that I had of being on Oprah back when, there was an Oprah show and not a network. And the lights were so bright, and everybody was really nervous. And just before we went on, because it happened to be live that day, which it usually wasn't, Oprah looked at all the guests and said, "So how does it feel to be live in front of 35 million people?" Whoa! Well, I wasn't talking about veganism that day, but if I had been, it would have felt magnificent. Because the more people who know about this way of life, the more this world, life on earth, and generations to come are going to profit and prosper because of it. So I am Victoria Moran, and I've written a whole bunch of books, the latest being Main Street Vegan. That's this. It's at the table in the back. I also have some copies of the Vegan Guide to New York City, which I didn't write. This comes from Rin Barry. How many of you here know who Rin Barry was? We just lost Rin a year ago. God rest his soul. Rin was the historian of the vegan and vegetarian movement. So when Carrie was telling me what she wanted to do today, I thought it would be appropriate to talk a little bit about where we've come from. But to do this, I have to say thanks and honor back to Rin, because even though I've been around this for 30 years as a vegan, 40, oh my gosh, 2 years as a vegetarian, I really owe it to Rin, knowing that it went way, way back. I talk to some new vegans and I say, where did it start? Where do you think it started? And they'll say, PETA? Or sometimes the health people will cite Dr. Dean Ornish, who did his work with heart disease back in the 1980s, published in the early 90s. Those were all amazing push forwards. But this movement, this idea, this commitment goes way back, and I do want to talk a little bit about that today. But first I want to find out who you are and what you want to hear, because we're this lovely, intimate little group. So the fact is, we don't have to talk about anything I came to talk about if you guys want to talk about something else. So the great thing about a small group is we can customize. So first I just want to know, I hesitate to say, how vegan are you? Because there are vegans who judge other vegans. Has anybody met one of those? Rarely, yes, every now and then. It's not like that at all, nor is it about judging people who are not yet vegan. Because everybody that I meet, I see as either a vegan or a pregan. They're on their way because the world is enlightening. I used to have a spiritual teacher who would talk about the upward progression of the universe. And there really is an upward progression of the universe, and this is part of that. So I just want to know, so that I know who you are, who is like vegan, like, well, I'm so vegan, I'm a diehard vegan, I'm going to come to anything if it says vegan. Okay. Lot of choir preaching going on. That happens all the time. If this room were packed to the gills with standing room, the ratio would be the same, because everybody likes to hear what they already know and then likes support, and we need the support, and that's great. So who is moving in this direction? Maybe you're vegetarian, you're really wanting to make it all the way and be plant-based in your diet, and maybe look at some of the other issues as well. Anybody fits that description? Okay, how about health-conscious omnivore? Just kind of curious, veg-curious? Okay, good for you. Anybody who's just like a junk food junkie and kind of wandered in here because it was cold and rainy out? Okay, well that's too bad, because I usually give that person a free book. I figure they need it. Okay, so I want to go back a little bit in history, but before I do, I want to start with what's going on today. This is World Vegan Day, and I'm wearing my Union Jack dress for a couple of reasons. One being it's designed by vegan designer Lois Eastland, who's here today, and who is part of the fashion show that's going to be happening later on. Hope you guys will all stay around for that. But the other reason that it's appropriate to be wearing the flag of the motherland is because England had so much to do with promulgating vegetarianism, veganism, I think if it weren't for that little island across the Atlantic Ocean, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today with all that yummy vegan food outside the door. So I wanted to do that to help draw the connection. You see, 70 years ago this month, the Vegan Society was founded in the UK, which I think is just amazing, because those people had been going through World War II. I mean, think about it. They were dropping bombs on them. They spent the night in the subway stations. They sent their children out to live in the country. You know, Hitler was just across a little body of water. And yet, there were some vegetarians who were doing so much thinking about, wait a minute, if we're drinking the milk, what about the male calves? And they came to see that the veal industry only exists because of the dairy industry. It didn't seem consistent to them to drink milk, to have eggs, because you know, if you're a baby boy in an egg operation, you get killed instantly at birth. They do it by really icky means, shredding, maceration, because they're just useless in a financial sense, in an economic sense. So these lovely people said, you know what? To be a real vegetarian, we're going to take the first part and the last part from that, and we're going to be vegans. That's a pure vegetarian, a complete vegetarian. But they didn't know. I mean, we know today. This is not only an okay, healthy way to live. This is a supremely healthy way to live. The scientific literature is legion about what this way of eating can do for the plagues of modern civilization. We're talking about diabetes, heart disease, certainly. There is no other way of living and eating that can reverse heart disease other than this way of living and eating. There's no drug and no surgery that can reverse heart disease. This way of living and eating can. This is a great healthy diet. But back then, they didn't know. They didn't know if their bones would rot. They didn't know if they'd die in 6 months. They just did it. As one of them told me when I was over there in the early 80s interviewing people for my very first book, which was my college thesis, she said, we did it for pure, unadulterated compassion. So we have some heroes in our history, and I want to go back quite a bit further. How about in the beginning? You know, some people believe that Genesis is a historical fact of exactly how the earth and everything got here. Other people believe it's a beautiful allegorical poem. Doesn't matter. We're just going to look right now at the words of the Bible, a book that is revered by the majority of the human population. And in Eden, things were vegan. In fact, in Eden, everybody was vegan, not just the people, but all the animals. There was no killing in Eden. So what were humans supposed to eat way back in Adam and Eve's time? Well, Genesis 1:29 says, behold. And it's very interesting. People who really know the Bible far better than I say that's a big deal, because very seldom are we ever told that God said, behold, or listen to this. This is big. But God said, behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed. To you it shall be for meat. So what does that mean, herb-bearing seed? Well, that means fruit. Fruit is supposed to have seeds in it. A lot of the fruit nowadays doesn't have seeds in it because it's been hybridized. But a fruit has seeds. And so do the fruit-like vegetables. These are the botanical fruits like tomatoes and squash and peppers that we think of as vegetables, but they're really botanically fruits. And also the nuts and seeds that are in these fruits. So in Eden, Adam and Eve were raw fruitarians. Have you known anybody like that? Sometimes you meet somebody, they live in the tropics somewhere, and they eat really, really lightly and pure in that way. Now, interestingly enough, after the fall, when immortality on earth was no longer promised and things got very difficult, guess what God told Adam and Eve they could add to their diets? The leafy greens. Before that, the greens and the grasses were just for the cattle and the other animals. Humans got the leafy greens, interestingly enough, when sickness and death entered the picture, because we needed those leafy greens. There's nothing healthier that you can put in your body. Who drinks green juices? I was just telling my husband, there's a list of things I want to do to have a better life, and one of those is every single day have a green juice. Not just every now and then when I've got all the ingredients and feel like cleaning the juicer. Every single day, because those greens are so full of phytonutrients and antioxidants and minerals. We need those now, and evidently Adam and Eve after the fall needed them too. Now, curiously enough, there was a big old flood. Y'all remember that? And the animals came 2 by 2. Well, after the flood, the vegetation was gone. And so according to the Bible, God said, okay, no vegetation, you guys can have the meat. Well, this is where there's a difference between people of the book, people who revere the Bible, who happen to be vegetarian or vegan, and those who aren't. The vegetarians and vegans say, that was temporary. Yeah, there was no vegetation, but then it came back. And the other people say, woohoo, he said eat the meat and we're going to keep on eating it. Well, have you met people like that who kind of were vegetarian or vegan for a while and then they went back? Yeah, it's like, I talked to somebody the other day. In fact, I had a lovely gentleman on my radio show, 81 years old. He contacted me because he said that to his knowledge, he is the longest surviving person who ever had lung cancer. Fascinating story, 37 years survival. He used only natural methods, didn't do the medical thing at all, and a vegan diet. And I thought, well, this is a great story. I'll have him on the show. And we're talking along. And then he comes out with, well, yeah, he was vegan to get over the cancer. Then when he got over it, he stopped being vegan. Just kind of like, yeah, well, we had this flood. We got to eat meat now. So we do what we do because we have free will and human nature. But that story, whether you see it as history or whether you see it as poetry, is so telling. And that story is repeated throughout many, many traditions of the world. So let's come forward a little bit, and we're going to stick in the West for the moment, and we're going to talk about Pythagoras. Who remembers the Pythagorean theorem in geometry class? I don't remember anything from geometry class. I actually took it in summer school so it wouldn't mess up my grade point average. But I have to tell you, Pythagoras is the only math guy that I regard as hot. Pythagoras was such a guy. Not only was he a mathematician, he was a philosopher, and he was an athletic coach. Who knew? Now, Pythagoras was, as far as we can tell, a raw food vegan, although he called the foods that he ate unfired. And for anybody who wanted to study with him in his school of mathematics and philosophy, they had to agree to a 40-day fast, and we're talking water, not carrot, celery, spinach juice with some cashew milk in the afternoon, and they had to agree to his diet thereafter. In fact, before the word vegetarian was coined in the 1800s, people who didn't eat meat were called Pythagoreans. Cool, isn't it? So Pythagoras, in his athletic coaching career, I know we've got a great weightlifter coming up later this afternoon, but Pythagoras trained a guy named Milo of Croton. Anybody heard of him? Milo was the athlete. He was like the Bruce Jenner of ancient Greece. He was a wrestler. He won 7 Olympiads. Nobody could beat this guy. And he did all that on this raw vegan diet of his teacher and coach, Pythagoras. Now, Pythagoras did influence some of the Greek philosophers. Plato played lip service to being vegetarian, Socrates as well. There was one named Porphyry, who's not so famous, but he wrote the first big book on vegetarianism and why it was wrong to kill animals. But in the West, after that kind of golden age of Greece, the whole idea of being vegetarian went underground somewhat. Now, most people at that time were poor. So most people were vegetarian just because that's what they had to eat. But in terms of making the choice to be vegetarian, or what we would today call vegan, it wasn't happening at that time. There were a few lights. We know of St. Francis. Now, do we know for absolutely certain that St. Francis was vegetarian? No. But the implication is certainly that anybody who would call the birds his brothers and sisters, anybody who would go to a village and say, look, you guys, the reason this wolf is killing your chickens and your small animals is because he's hungry. If you'll just feed him, he has promised me he'll leave you guys alone. Now, that either had to be a vegetarian or the first Italian animal rights activist. So kudos to St. Francis there. We also had Da Vinci. We Italians have something going for us. Da Vinci spoke out on vegetarianism. He was, as far as we know, himself a vegetarian. Now, interestingly enough, you know there are vegan stereotypes? You've heard a few of those. And one of them is, well, you guys really like animals and you don't think much of people. Unfortunately, it appears that Da Vinci fit that stereotype. There are lots of things that he said about the world would be better off if there weren't any people on it. And in addition to being an artist and a scientist and an anatomist, he designed weapons for the military. He really liked coming up with ways to win wars and destroy one's enemy. But he was not at all interested in destroying the innocence of animal life or of eating animal foods. Ryn Berry, that I told you about, wrote a book called Famous Vegetarians and Their Favorite Recipes. You might want to check that out. Da Vinci is one of them, and all these wonderful vegetarians of history and of antiquity. And we don't really know that these were their favorite recipes, but he took from historical documents. Leonardo, for example, really liked figs. So there's a fig pudding. So you might want to take a look at that book and have some fun. Now, we've been looking at the Western world. Let's just move over for the moment and back in history a bit to the East, to India. In the Ahimsa religions, these are the ancient Vedic teachings from which we got Hinduism and yoga, and later Buddhism and Jainism. These religions are based primarily on the idea of harmlessness and reverence for life. So in yoga, who does yoga? Y'all had Derek Goodwin earlier. He way does yoga. So in yoga, there are precepts, the yamas and the niyamas. These are rules by which people are supposed to live their lives, something the way Jews and Christians have the Ten Commandments. But this first principle, this principle of ahimsa, of non-harming, is so revered that you can even throw out the other commandments if it helps you to uphold ahimsa. So Ryn used to tell this story. If you're in the woods and a hunter comes along and asks you which way the deer went, you can disregard the proscription against lying, and you can say, deer went that way. You can toss out the commandment that says that you should not steal. If that hunter looks aside and you can grab his bow and hide it, that's fine, because ahimsa is higher. You can even disregard the precept regarding sexual purity, because if you can seduce the hunter and distract him so he won't kill the deer, that's all good. So this just tells you how much ahimsa means in the Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism faiths that came from India. Now I want to talk a little bit about yoga. Yoga is not a religion, but it certainly is a spiritual discipline and a spiritual practice. So always before, we've been looking at ahimsa in terms of non-harming. So we'd be talking about an animal rights vegan or vegetarian today. But the yogis were very scientific, and they looked at diet to see, okay, of all the ways that people can eat, what way is going to make it easier for somebody to meditate, sit for long periods, and reach this enlightened state that we're after. So as they looked at foods, they put them in categories that they called gunas. And there was one called tamas. And tamas is the energy of lethargy. And tamasic energy and tamasic foods makes you really tired. Those kinds of foods are things like stuff that's been old, like preserved for a really long time, or it's been frozen, or it's overcooked. Oh my gosh. Oh, meat is like that, because, it's kind of putrefying before you can eat it, and all the kind of chemicals and stuff we have today, those are so tamasic, and if you eat this, you just don't really care much about, like, having a more enlightened kind of life, and it's really weird that that's the kind of food they feed to people in prisons, but, that's what tamas is all about. But then, the yogis looked around at the foods and the drinks that were available, and they said, wait a minute. On the complete opposite side of tamas, we have got rajasic, and rajasic means pump you up and give you every kind of energy and make you go, 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 and stay up all night and work really late and get up really early and go to the gym and just knock them dead at the office the next morning. How are we going to do this? We are going to do this with a venti trinity cappuccino. Woo-hoo-hoo, caffeine, we love it. Coffee. In countries where they don't drink coffee, they make their tea really, really, really strong so it can stand up by itself and so it can pump you up. Eggs will pump you up, so will fried foods, so will lots of spices and lots of salt, and then you will really be ready to go to town and give it to your kids and add a lot of sugar, and guess what? They are going to be ready to go. Okay. Over here, you try to meditate, what happens? Fall asleep. Over here, you try to meditate, what happens? You can't sit. So in the middle, the yogis said, we have another kind of food, and we're going to call that sattvic. The sattvic foods, according to the ancient yogis, are fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, whole grains, nuts and seeds, legumes, that means beans, and milk from healthy cows. Now, I don't know that at this point in history there are any healthy cows, and I certainly don't believe there's any karma-free milk, but looking from India 5,000 years ago, this is what they saw as these balanced, beautiful foods that would promote the ability to meditate. So I offer this to you now in comparison to what the doctors are saying today, the enlightened doctors, is the diet for humans. It's just what the yogis talked about 5,000 years ago. So when I called this presentation From Pythagoras to Permanente, I was referring to a statement that came out last year from Kaiser Permanente, the big managed care organization, the big HMO, that is totally invested financially in keeping people healthy. And they said that a whole foods, plant-based diet based on those very foods the yogis talked about but without the milk was what people ought to be eating, and that it's what doctors ought to be recommending to their patients. So we've come a long way, baby. So I just want to do a quick little overview of between then and now, and I'll ask my friend here, how much time do we have?
Let's see. Well, it's 2:34 now, so we have time.
Okay, when do we stop?
So we started at like a little after 2:15, right?
Okay.
So
okay.
I mean, it's supposed to be technically an hour.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, we're wonderful, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. So as we go from this ancient time, we've got the Hindus and the Buddhists. Now, a lot of people say, well, I know Buddhists and they eat meat, but that's because when Buddhism went in different directions, it went into different places. And so some of the Buddhists stayed vegetarian, some didn't. But when you go back to the teachings, the original teachings, the Ahimsa is there, the vegetarianism is there. But in most of the world, it was just lost. It was as if it had never happened. But then, in the 1600s, a company in England, we actually learned about it in history class. It was the British West India Company. They went to England to do trading. into India, to do trading. And after that, India became part of the British Empire, the big colonization. Well, guess what happened? English people went to India, and they learned about Indian ideas and Indian beliefs, and one of those was vegetarianism. And so they brought these ideas back to England, and little pockets of vegetarians started showing up. And over time, it became a big deal in England. It is such a big deal today that the House of Commons this month, World Vegan Month, is giving every member of the House of Commons a free vegan meal in their cafeteria if they want to have it. Now, it would be nice if that happened at the U.S. Congress, maybe next year, but there's always been this interest. So there was the back and forth between India and England, and then people started writing books on the subject, and then not only English people, but anybody who could read English were picking up on it. So Tolstoy in Russia became a very devout vegetarian. We had Percy Shelley, the poet, his wife Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, very, very vegetarian. George Bernard Shaw, the playwright. So there were these bright lights of being vegetarian, and sometimes they were funny. You know, we talked today about, oh, it's really inconvenient sometimes. You know, it's hard to go to people's houses. Well, George Bernard Shaw told a story. He had a dinner party, and of course it was going to be vegetarian. And one of these guests just said, well, no, you know, I'm not coming if I can't be served meat. And he said, fine. So he got a chicken and put it in her chair, and when she showed up for dinner, it was like, there's your chicken. You want to kill it, it's yours. Well, she ate vegetarian that night, which many people would if they really had to go back and do the deed. So how did vegetarianism, how did veganism get to the United States? Well, a lot of it was religious, interestingly enough, and I know that today Carrie has set up this day to look at some of the comparative religion aspects of veganism. But there was a church that started in England and came to this country. It was called the Bible Christian Church. Great big deal here in the Northeast, largely in Pennsylvania, in the early 1800s. Then there was also a woman named E.G. White, and she was the co-founder of the Seventh-day Adventist movement. She had visions that Genesis 1:29, what we were supposed to eat originally, was not just a pretty story, that if we ate in this way, we would hasten the return of this wonderful time on earth, that Isaiah prophecy when the lion will lie down with the lamb and eat straw like the ox and all that. And so Seventh-day Adventists to this day are recommended vegetarianism. They don't have to do it. So what we have, very interestingly, is a religious denomination of which half the people are vegetarian and the other half eat meat. And of the vegetarians, half are vegan and half are not, about. So it's really cool when they go to do these studies looking at health. So we've got our group of omnivores and our group of lacto-ovo vegetarians, people who don't eat meat or fish, but they do eat eggs and dairy, and then total vegetarians or vegans. And because Adventists live very similarly in other ways, they don't smoke, they drink very little, they have a strong family structure. So everything else is pretty much the same, except the ones that are eating the animal foods and the ones that aren't. So if you're somebody who likes scientific studies and you're really interested in the health aspects of this, you might want to Google Adventist Health Study. It's so fascinating. The vegans come out way ahead. And interestingly enough, there is a town in California called Loma Linda, and that's where the Loma Linda Medical School is, a Seventh-day Adventist institution. And lots of Adventists live there. And that is the only city in North America that is a blue zone. You know, the blue zones are the places where people live longer and better than their contemporaries in other places. So something's going on. In addition to the religious vegetarians who were really coming around in the late 1800s, we had some fascinating health people. One was Sylvester Graham. Now, he was religious too. He was a Presbyterian minister. But he also really believed that not only human health, but our morality would be bolstered if we would stop eating animals and we would stop eating refined products. He did not believe in this new white flour that was coming along and the white sugar and the processed foods. He was so popular that when he went to speak in Boston in 1830, the butchers and the bakers got together to form a coalition to keep him from having a place to speak, because they were afraid that if he got his message out, they were going to go out of business. So of course we know him today for graham crackers, but originally that was because he was promoting whole grains, and for those who could do it, even more of a raw vegan diet. Now, one of his followers was somebody else whose name you know, and that's John Harvey Kellogg. Now, Kellogg was a physician. He was a GI surgeon and a Seventh-day Adventist, so he did know about vegetarianism from his religion. But after years of being one of the top surgeons in the country and seeing all these people coming to him with these stomach issues and intestinal issues, he finally figured out if different foods went in, he would have a lot fewer surgeries to do. So he started a place called the Battle Creek Sanitarium, and at that time, all kinds of celebrities flocked to him. You know, we've got our cool celebrity physicians today. We've got Dr. Esselstyn at the Cleveland Clinic. We've got Dr. Ornish out in California. We've got Dr. Khan in Detroit. But at that time, if you wanted a kind of revamp, we know Beyonce and Jay-Z went vegan for a month. Well, if you want to go vegan for a month back in 1900, you would go to the Battle Creek Sanitarium. So some of his clients were people like Johnny Weissmuller, who was the first Tarzan, and he was a vegetarian. But he also had non-vegetarians like Thomas Edison and Amelia Earhart. So he was a big deal getting this message out. There was also a fellow named Bernard Mcfadden. Did you ever hear of those old-fashioned ads? They'd be in the backs of magazines and they'd say, "Are you a 98-pound weakling?" And that was an ad for Physical Culture magazine, which was Bernard Mcfadden's magazine. He was the first person who really promoted the iron pill, lifting those weights and getting yourself built up so you'd have stamina and you'd have immunity and you'd have strength in the world. And he also promoted a vegan diet. And he started physical culture restaurants around the country. There was one here in New York City. And one of his followers was a fellow named Herbert Shelton. Herbert Shelton made his name in fasting as a way to heal. The philosophy being the body is a self-healing mechanism. When given the needs of life and otherwise left alone, it will heal itself. Now we're going to come full circle, as things so often do. At this time, there was a fellow in India. His name was Gandhi. Mohandas K. Gandhi, and he read Shelton. Why? Because Shelton wrote about fasting, and Gandhi was going to do a lot of fasting for political reasons, because even though there were some good things that had come from the UK being in India, India was ready to be free. So Gandhi read Herbert Shelton. Well, guess who read Gandhi? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he took from Gandhi the ideas of nonviolent resistance, completely changed history in this country and around the world. Now, who was a follower of Dr. King, who was then inspired to read Gandhi for himself? Dick Gregory. Y'all know who Dick Gregory is? Dick Gregory, back in the 1960s, was a very big comedian. Big meaning he was famous, and big meaning he weighed over 300 pounds. But as he read Gandhi, and he came to see that the violence that we perpetrate on other humans and the violence we perpetrate on that cow and her calf are really no different, he wanted to make some changes. He wandered one day into a health food store on the south side of Chicago, and he met an amazing woman, a naturopathic physician named Alvinia Fulton. Well, Alvinia Fulton took Dick Gregory by the hand, and she made him over. And she got him to eat not just vegan food. Of course, in those days, vegan food meant healthy food. That was all we had. These days, it's a little different. We got donuts and things. back then, if you went vegan, you were going to be pretty healthy. But she got him doing the smoothies and the juices and the sprouting and the microgreens and the raw foods. And Dick Gregory not only trimmed down, but his energy and his power for his human rights work and his animal protection work and his changing the world work just went crazy. And just like his mentor Mahatma Gandhi, he started fasting. And he said, I'm going to fast until the Vietnam War is over. And everybody was like, well, that seems pretty dangerous because we don't know when that's going to be. But Dr. Fulton put some powders and things in all those juices. So he was able to actually do that. And I can remember as a teenager seeing him on the Johnny Carson show talking about, I am going to fast on juice until this war is over. Well, he wrote a book called Dick Gregory's Natural Diet for Folks Who Eat. He called it that because he so often fasted. He needed to make sure that, people knew this book was for folks who eat. And that was one of the inspirations for me. As was the American Vegan Society that had been founded in this country in 1960. It still exists. I'm a big fan of the American Vegan Society because they were carrying the torch for this when nobody else was out there. I always say, when people become 50, they get a membership in the AARP, whether you want it or not. Those of you who are younger than 50, look out for it. The day will come, you'll get your membership card. I think it should be like that for everybody who goes vegan. They should get a membership in the American Vegan Society because they were here when nobody else was, and they believed in me. It took me a while to go vegan. It was in my introduction that I'm an obesity survivor. I was a practicing compulsive overeater and food addict for many years, and it was tough. It was tough for me to go vegan because, when you're going to go on an eating binge and you got to stand there in the 7-Eleven and read all those labels, that just takes a lot of time. So it was tough for me, but when I finally made it, they were there standing by me. They hadn't let me go. And that's how we have to be. With all these people will say to me all the time, yeah, well, it's my brother. My brother is like overweight and he's diabetic and he just won't change. I'm sorry your brother won't change, but my mother was a great saleswoman. She could sell anything to anybody, and she always said to me, just don't bother with those cold leads. If somebody doesn't want what you're selling, just walk away and you go find the people that are. There are people very, very interested in what we have to sell. There are people who are hurting. There are people who went to see their doctor yesterday, and he said, your cholesterol is off the charts, you're pre-diabetic, whatever it was that they heard that they're scared about, they're interested in what we have to say. There are people who were just playing around on YouTube and they saw one of those videos of what happens in a factory farm or on a slaughterhouse. Their heart was touched and moved and opened, but they don't know what to do. They got up this morning for breakfast and they looked in their refrigerator and they saw bacon and eggs and sausage and skim milk. They need the information that we have. And very often people say, but I've only been doing this a few months myself. I'm no expert. Well, you're a few months expert, more than that person that just saw that video yesterday. And more people, even Al Gore, praise the Lord, and it's about time, have come around for environmental reasons. The environment thing is so scary to me. It's very interesting. When it's your health and your arteries, that's very personal. People get that. And when you see what goes on with the animals and it breaks your heart, that's personal too. But when we hear about the environment, that's so distant, I think, to most of us. You look out the window, environment looks fine, but it's not fine. Had a wonderful fellow on my radio show a couple of days ago, Dr. Richard Oppenlander. He's written a couple of books on the subject. One is called Comfortably Unaware. He said that in terms of climate change, we have until 2017 to turn things around. And according to both the UN and the World Bank, animal agriculture is not just one of the many causes of climate change, it is the biggest cause of climate change, And if that were off the table, within 10 years, enough of that methane gas would be out of the atmosphere that we could win this thing. If everybody just stopped driving and flying in planes and using any kind of transportation, which of course is not going to happen, but let's just say it did, it would take 100 years for that carbon to leave the atmosphere. But let's just say that Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity are right. Let's just say there is no global warming. That's just made up, that's just a myth, nothing to worry about. Okay, we're going to run out of water that people can drink in 15 years. They're predicting water wars the way we have had wars in our lifetime over oil. This is serious stuff. 2045, you know what's predicted for 2045? By the reputable scientists around the world, the overwhelming majority, that's the year when there will be, for the first time in the history of this planet, no fish in the seas. In the wonderful documentary Cowspiracy, if you haven't seen it, Dr. Oppenlander was saying, and overfishing, of course any fishing at this time in history is overfishing, is a serious problem. These are all problems, and they are so incredibly depressing. But guess what's not depressing? Guess what is eudaimonic? I learned that word by watching that movie about a spelling bee. Eudaimonic means happy making. I wish there were a short, easy word for happy making, but a very happy making thing that's going on is we can be vegan. Yay! So, some of you were vegan when you walked in here. Raise your hands, raise your hands. I hope some of the rest of you will be vegans walking out. Or maybe if you just can't do it all today, you will be on the path to getting it done today, and you'll be part of this wonderful surge. So, here's what's in it for you. You will lose weight if you have weight to lose. Now, this is not if you're doing a whole lot of the processed foods. Maybe 10% of your calories, treats, and whatnot. But generally, you're going to want to eat whole plant foods. What did the yogis talk about? Vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds. The basics. Basic plant foods, the stuff you can get over here at the farmer's market. And then, if you have weight to lose, that's going to fall off. And your cholesterol will lower and even normalize for most people within what? A year? 6 months? 21 days. That's quickie. You want a quick fix? There's one for you. Blood pressure is another really quick fix. And you get such delicious food. I used to eat American food. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. My mom was from Mississippi. We ate American food. And we had pork chops and fried chicken and pizza. And then we had more pork chops and fried chicken and pizza. And every now and then we might have spaghetti. You know, it's okay, but not exactly culinary ecstasy. But now, as a vegan, the beautiful colors of the fruits and the vegetables and the smoothies and the juices, and then the treats just here next door at Peace Food Cafe and our other wonderful vegan restaurants in New York City, the food is phenomenal. And you're going to feel so good. You can't explain feeling good to somebody who hasn't felt good in a really long time. And a lot of the people that you'll talk to and that you'll try to encourage, maybe they haven't really felt good for a long time. Remember Bruce Springsteen, Glory Days? For a lot of people, in terms of their health, high school was it. That's the best they've ever felt in their lives. Well, I'm here to tell you, you can feel better than that when you're, oh my gosh, 64 like me. You can feel phenomenal from eating this way and living this way and caring about others. It was mentioned that my new book is going to be called The Good Karma Diet. And that's in 2 parts. In one way, it's just cause and effect. You put in these clean, good foods, and you're going to reap the karma of better health. But also, you base your life on caring for the other, for that poor scared animal in that slaughter line, for this earth that we need to leave here for our children and our grandchildren. Something happens, and something shifts, and life gets better. Not perfect, it's still earth, but if you talk to the vegans who are here today and to others that you run into, maybe when you go to the restaurants, and just say, as I've said to people for my book, I have some of these stories in my book, I call them good karma stories. What changed in your life? What got better? And I expected people to say, oh, my diabetes went away and this and that, and they say that stuff too. But so many of them talk about, I was finally free enough that I could fall in love. I finally saw that I could quit the job that I hate and start my own raw food cracker company. Incredible things happen when you take an incredible step for good. So thank you all so much for being here for part of this. We have 4 little minutes left for a couple of questions. So somebody talk to me. Hey.
Hi, Victoria. Thank you very much for being here. You're very inspiring. You started off your talk talking about the Bible, the Old Testament, and one of the things I hear a lot is, the Old Testament advocates animal sacrifices, and they do mention, killing animals and eating meat. So what do you say to people like that?
Well, it's interesting. You can, as people will often say, prove anything by the Bible. But what I like to think about is that upward progression. At that time, that was what people saw to be able to do. And now we can do other things. I think it's this idea of being able to expand. And certainly for people who are Christian, the reason that Jesus got so mad in the temple, everybody said, oh, it was because of commerce, and he was, mad at the money changers. Well, what were they changing the money for? To buy animals to sacrifice. So you might even say he was upset about the animal sacrifice, and he was a very early animal rights advocate. So people will say that, and then they'll also say, for Christians, but, what about the loaves and the fishes? Okay, I'm going to tell you another Rin Berry story. When Rin was teaching for Main Street Vegan Academy, which is a program that we have here to train vegan lifestyle coaches and educators, somebody asked him that in the very first class, and Rin was a professor. He'd been at the New School, and he was a very humble man. And she asked about the loaves and the fishes, and he said, well, when I translated the New Testament from the Greek, and then I just had to stand there a minute and think, there's a man standing in my living room who translated the New Testament from the Greek. But he went on to say, when I translated the New Testament from the Greek, I saw that word for fish, everywhere else in the New Testament, it's fish. It's just, this is the word for fish. But in that particular story, it's a whole different word. And it's a word, the first definition for which is a relish, like a hummus or baba ganoush. Second meaning, dessert. Third meaning, little fishes. And evidently some translator at some point thought that it was more miraculous to multiply fishes than to multiply hummus. So to this day, I call that story the miracle of the loaves and tahini. One more quick question? No more quick questions. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. Eat your veggies.
Thank you.